I take refuge in Buddha, mind of not knowing. I take refuge in Dharma, mind of bearing witness. I take refuge in Sangha, mind of parental compassion. So let me ask you, what brought you to practice? Do you remember? What were your hopes and aspirations? Do you remember? It's good to refresh them. Some of us, so long ago, it's like a story in a dream. And I have to say, in all honesty, I truly don't know the why of it anymore at all. But it's a joy. It's a responsibility. Was it something you read about Zen, maybe in the ox herding pictures? Picture about seeing the tracks of the ox, reading something in the Dharma? Was it some anxiety or fear? Some big existential question of life or death? In the Boston Art Museum, there's this amazing painting by Paul Gauguin, this masterpiece of his that he created in Tahiti, where he's written on these three fundamental questions. It's a picture of this jungle, this wild beast in it. This is, which is what Gary Snyder, he writes about the wild. Sometimes people think he's talking about the bush. He is, but he's talking about the wild. He's talking about the absolute. He's talking about where everything emerges from. Paul Gauguin answers these three questions, these three fundamental life questions. Where do we come from? What are we? And where are we going? Birth, daily existence, and death. Have you been brushed by the wings of death in your life? Everybody has. Whether you realize it or not, everybody has. Most people, my experience, is seeking some sense of peace of mind from this mind of anxiety that has become so prevalent in our times. Maybe even some dim glimmer that the Dharma might be a path to happiness, that there's a possibility of peace of mind and happiness is visible in this very life, right here and now. Something that's somewhere in the back that's not even quite remembered. One of his poems was Llewellyn's father's favorite poem, T.S. Eliot. He loved T.S. Eliot. And T.S. Eliot writes about the hidden laughter of children in the rose bushes. The hidden laughter of children in the rose bushes. It's that quality that I'm talking about. It's in the back of your mind. It's like something that's almost remembered. The sense of spiritual innocence, timeless reality, something lost in what can seem like wasted, sad time of human existence. This feeling of children at play in the apple tree that opens itself up to us in the stillness of the present moment, visible in this very moment. Not the what of might have been in the past or what might be in the future, but right here, right now. And that's what the Buddha remembered, that reinvigorated his practice. So he sat this noble sesshin that resulted in his enlightenment. The Dharma practice, he realized, wasn't some painful, ascetic, torturing, even gaining practice. It was like the ease of a child sitting under an apple tree on a spring day. So why did you come to practice, and why have you stayed? Why did you come to practice, and why have you stayed? A few weeks ago, I started a talk on the Shmanaphala Sutra, the fruit of the contemplative life. Shramana is these wandering mendicant monk, who dedicated their life to spiritual practice. And phala is a fruit, so it's a fruit of that path of the Shramana. And you may remember that King Ajatasattu was talking about this. He was overcome with guilt for having murdered his father for his patricide to gain the throne. And he was seeking spiritual solace. Have you ever sought spiritual solace? I sure hope so. I sure hope so. Because this isn't some intellectual practice or something that it's a manipulative practice to get something out of it. To be able to truly take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and find that refuge. So Ajatasattu asked the Buddha, he said, is there any visible fruit is there any fruit, right here and now, this life of practice, this way that you and your monks are practicing and living, that can be seen right here and now, that are realized in the present moment, that have somehow some value, that not this pie in the sky about I'm going to be enlightened and going to be reborn in the Western lands and, hallelujah, the angels are going to sing. He says, right here and now. Right here and now. In the same way that a carpenter or a hairdresser or a lawyer even realizes this benefit in their, by practicing their trade, they realize some benefit. They realize an income coming in. They realize some ability to do something that's of value for others. They realize some respect in the moment in terms of being, competent at what they're doing. He said, is there anything like that in the spiritual practice? Is it just all pie in the sky? You guys are just doing this because you're going to get enlightened someday, some kalpas, 20 kalpas from now. He said, I've asked the same question of all of the great spiritual teachers. You're the last one of them. And he said, I got to tell you, it's kind of lovely. He said, it's every one of them, and he goes through, these were all actual spiritual teachers at the time. He says, it was like talking to wriggling eels. He said, they just twist and turn. You couldn't ask. It's like politicians. He said, you ask them about a mango, and they'll talk to you about a breadfruit. So the Buddha responds, and he responds by describing for Ajatasattu the Theravadan path practice. This what's called the gradual path of concentration and purification. This gradual path of practice, it was followed by path of the elders. It's called practice by Buddha and his monastic followers, leading ultimately to the ultimate release of nirvana. It's a practice that requires lifetimes of purification. Lifetimes of purification. Kalpas, literally kalpas. Talk about 10 kalpas of practice or whatever. I mean, how many kalpas are you being practiced for now? You ever ask yourself that question? Whose vows are you living out? You're sitting here in the Zendo right now. So it's a path of sometimes called the path of the middle way. So it's called the path of the middle way because the Buddha said, he said, I've tried these different paths. I started out as a prince, and it was a fat life. It was a good fat life. As much cocaine as I wanted, as much pot as I wanted, dancing girls, dancing boys. I had it. And then one day, life decided that it would thrust these messengers in front of me, sickness, old age, and death, and it set me on the path. He said, I practiced, and eventually I came to ascetic practice. And I practiced so hard that I almost died. He said, I realized that wasn't a practice. And then I realized that it was a practice of the middle way. And he said, suppose you want to start a fire. He said, suppose you want to start something, we have no start today. So you let's say you go and you say, oh, here's a nice piece of wood that's half in the river, and I'll just haul it out of the river and set fire. That can work. This fat, sappy, wet life. And he says, suppose you find some piece of wood that's been bleaching in the sun for 10 years, and you touch it and it turns to powder. He said, the ascetic life is in the middle. But he said, if you take a sound piece of wood, it's been dry, and it's still sound, and you can build a fire. And even so with the practice. We also have, in the Mahayana way, we talk about the middle way, but it's a little bit different. It's a lot different. When we talk about the middle way, it's how things are, how things show up. So we talk about emptiness all the time. Yeah, where is this coming from? Where is it going to? But then there's also how things show up, the thusness of things, how they are. And in the Diamond Sutra, it says like a bubble in a stream. like a flash of lightning, like a conjurer's trick, like a dream. So the most common explication of the, this path of the elders, the Theravada path of practice is, there's four noble truths. The truth of, that desire leads to suffering, that ultimately that that there's a path that leads us away from that, and that ultimately you can reach nirvana. So it's an eightfold path. This practice of right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, and right meditation. And the overarching truth that the Buddha said, you can always test my practice, my whether something. There's a website that says, "Did the Buddha really say this?" This is, you get anything that sounds kind of half-wise or cute. There's a quote, from the Buddha, and so somebody has made it their life's work to debunk these hoaxes. But the Buddha also was aware of this, and he said, there are four seals, like a custom seal. You buy a package of cigarettes, and there's a little tape on it that says, "No, this is a genuine article. They paid their tax on it." And he said, there's a seal on all of my teachings. So, and he said, if you want to test whether it's my teaching, first, does it address the question of suffering, of human suffering? So, do you believe that there is some pure emotion that is not marked by suffering? Do you believe that? Do you believe that there is a pure state of emotion, love, maybe? One thing I promise you about love, if you have the courage to love deeply, you are going to suffer unimaginably. The more you love, the more you're going to suffer. Because sooner or later, it's going to fall apart. Either the person will leave you, you're going to leave that person, they're going to die, you're going to die, you're both going to die, whatever's going to happen. It's necessarily going to come apart. And unless you're able to open your hands and let whatever it is that you love most deeply, to kiss it on the wing, unless you can let go of it, it's going to be torn. The truth of impermanence, that everything is marked by impermanence. It's just the way it is. The truth of non-self, that there's nothing that exists on its own side of it. Everything is like this. It's like this net. We talk about the net of Indra. Everything is interconnected. Everything is reflecting everything else. It's all part of this everything machine. And then finally, the truth of nirvana. That this is something that can be realized in this very lifetime. And I'm talking now about the gradual path, but the Zen path is very different. It's not a gradual path. It's not a matter of working through this. I got to purify the mind. I got to learn to punch it. It's a matter of seeing right now. Just right now, seeing. You're never apart from it. It's not a matter of you simply have to build up. I got to flex up my zazen muscles. So a little bit you do. You have to learn to concentrate. But even then, some people have these spontaneous openings. But it is a direct path. It happens right now. Right now. Right now. It's not a gradual path. It's not a step-by-step practice. It's right now. So there's a laughter. We're talking about joy, and that's where we came to Shramana. There's a laughter at the heart of things. Truly, there is a laughter at the heart of things. It's very common for people to burst out laughing at the moment of realization. I can tell. People come into my little Sanzen room and they have a smile. There's a certain smile that I've come to recognize, and there really is a laughter. It's kind of a joke in some ways when you actually realize, oh my God, really? A little bit when you realize the truth of birthlessness and deathlessness, you go, it's hard to ignore. But there's a cosmic joke that all of our striving, all of our questioning, all of this to realize who we are, what this is, we come to realize it was right here all along. It's just right here. It's like the Sherlock Holmes purloined letter. You hide it in plain sight. It's just right here. It's just a matter of rubbing the dust out of your eyes and seeing what's happening. And there's different aspects of laughter. There's a joke, there's comic, there's kind of, comic stuff. There's a meanness of laughter. But this laughter at the heart of things it's a laughter, this realization that all of the confusion, all of the pain, all of the suffering, all of the envy, everything fall away. And when you see them in relation to the wholeness of life, when you see them in relation to the fullness of your own, I want to say being, but in the sutras they say not being. And it's a fundamentally essential part of practice. I mean, if there's, you see people going on quite dour, quite very serious in their practice on the monasteries, very serious and concentrated. I want to give them a poke in the ribs. I want to give them a kick. Because it's a fundamentally essential part of practice to have a sense of humor, to realize the joy in practice and to be able to share that joy with others, and fundamentally to have the ability to laugh at yourself, and the ability to play. And this ability to laugh at yourself, this part of laughter at the heart of things, it's a proportionate thing. Thinking this is so serious in terms of what's going on, and then something happens and you just realize, oh my, this seems so serious. And the truth of the matter, it's just some little game. Somebody kicked over my sanitizer. So in the Theravadan path of practice, sometimes people say in the Theravadan practice, well, it's the Mahayanas, the path of compassion. But the Buddha talked about the four divine states of the body, these four minds that you ultimately realize in terms of, firstly, the mind of metta, loving kindness, the mind of karuna, of compassion, and then the mind of mudita, the mind of sympathetic joy. So that it's the mind that where this practice is inherently the practice of joy, and it's a practice of joy. Yes, I am joyous when Dwell and bake something delicious that I get to eat. That makes me really happy. How wonderful! But I'm also joyous. I'm joyous when I see good things happening to anyone. It's a wonderful thing to be able to drop the mind of envy, to be able to drop the mind of resentment, to be able to really and truly experience a joy at seeing somebody else's happiness and to share it. This is your happiness too. They're just, it's on their fork at the moment, but we all share it. And then finally, the mind of equanimity, which is a big part of what Zen practice is. Can you be okay in the hard times? I'm so happy in the hard times. Maybe having a bit of a laugh about it sometimes. There's a story, a whole series of these books by Marilyn Robinson. If you ever want a really, really good book that's about this thick, read Marilyn Robinson's housekeeping book and find out about the laughter of children. But one of the other books she wrote, it's this minister and his son, they're going off in search of his father's grave in Kansas, Bleeding Kansas, at the time of abolition, which was a pretty hard, tough place. And they've got no money at all. And at one point they find themselves, this boy is about 12 or something, they find themselves having stolen a carrot out of somebody's garden. And they're running for it. So the guy fires a shotgun after them, and they take to their heels. They've stolen this carrot. Minister, and they sit down and they're asking for, they try to pick up, it's just such an old woody carrot, you can't even cut it. You can gnaw it, and they're asking for God's blessing for this wooden carrot, and they're saying, really? And they just burst out laughing. They just burst out laughing. So the king asks, he says, what's the immediate fruit of the contemplative life, something you see here and now? So they say, maybe you got the same question. A barber makes his living cutting hair. He supports himself, his family, good, simple life. What's the immediate benefit that you realize? Ask yourself, really and truly, is there a benefit that you realize? Or is it something, are you on this path because you're hoping for something that's going to happen down the road? Is it better than taking up a trade? Is there some visible, real world benefit? So the Buddha responds, not with philosophy, but he sets out to the king this gradual practice that's followed. Practical, accessible path, step-by-step path. So it's amazing sometimes the paths you see in India that people take. There's one guy who was very famous in India. He held his hand, his arm, since he was a child. He'd held his arm in this one position, and he'd taken that arm as in the same practice. And this arm was completely withered, just completely withered practice. And that was his Dharma practice. He'd taken it. It wouldn't last for very long, but I don't think I'd keep it up either. So in this path of practice, it's the Theravada path, this step-by-step path. It's it's sometimes called the path of concentration and purification. And there are the three main, it's like a tripod, it's like a three-legged stool of pentagon. See, the Sanskrit, sila, samadhi, and prajna. The sila are the precepts. Samadhi is meditative concentration, so this ability to, to fall apart, this ability to become so absorbed in the object of concentration that there's not two things in it. There's not me concentrating on that, there's just this. And then finally, the mind of prajna, which is this mind of, we talk about the insight that comes from meditative absorption from, and the Theravadins do also, but they also say, you know what, you Mahayana guys, you talk about it not being a cognitive understanding. Well, that's not what the Buddha said. So we don't need to talk about that. It's Sila Samadhi and Prajna. So what's the happiness? What's the happiness of leading this life? So it starts out when you actually look at it. So the first thing the Buddha says, so he's talking to the king. So what would you say? What would your opening sally be to the king? What would you offer? The Buddha says, well, you don't have to pay any taxes. It's cute. It's cute. And it would be something that would be beautiful. You don't have to pay any taxes. And he says, you know what? It doesn't matter if you were a slave before. It doesn't matter if I was a complete pauper. It doesn't matter what I was. Once I put on the yellow robe, I have a measure of respect in society. I'm seen as a shaman, somebody who's given their life up to God. It doesn't matter what my antecedents were. And there may be some karma that follows me along. It doesn't matter if you're a servant. But what's the happiness in and of itself of leading a simple ethical life? Leading a simple ethical life. The joy of a simple life of practice. There's a story in that it's in one particular one of those books talking about. I know it's an old Catholic project. True story at the time. So he talked about this before, but there was the monks used to rat each other out. They would go and they'd hear, and they're saying it that way, but it was out of kindness. They would say, "Oh, you know what? I found so and so having sex with a goat," and they'll go and tell the Buddha about it because that's something that they should atone for in this monthly atonement that they would have. But this one monk heard this other monk crying, like, "Oh, happiness! Oh, happiness!" And he went to the Buddha. He says, "I think you better talk to Joe. I hear him crying at night, moaning his life." So Joe happened to be one of the crown princes in one of the lineage, and he gave up, just as the Buddha did, to become a wandering shaman. So the Buddha called him in, had a cup of tea, and he said, "Is it true? One of your brother monks said that he heard you the other night bemoaning your lot, crying, oh, happiness, happiness." That he's inferred that there's something that you're really kind of stricken with sadness, with unhappiness, with dissatisfaction about this earth. I said, well, it's true what he heard, but it's not that at all. I've come to realize it's the first time in my life that I have known complete happiness by leading this simple, unvarnished life. It was a cry of joy. It wasn't a cry of sadness. You can imagine, you're wealthy, you get to wear all the fancy clothes and everything, but you're always worried that somebody's going to take it away from you. You're always worried that somebody's going to slip a knife in your lips. You're always worried that the crown princesses may be stepping out on you. And when you take that away and you lead this very simple life, the simpler your life is, the less need there is. The more you can this is enough. It's just practicing this. How much is enough? Do I need this? Do I need anything more? That's what Thoreau writes about all the time. He's written books on this, the joy of a simple life of practice. Simplify, simplify, simplify. Thoreau says the greatest wealth is to live content with your life. He said, when you live, and this is my experience is that if you find serenity and seclusion, and serenity, Slav actually told me this years ago, he maybe doesn't remember that serenity and seclusion doesn't mean living all alone by yourself in the forest. It's being able to find in this refuge in yourself, to be serene in, to be a mind of people at truly a peace with itself. Remember that? Huh? Maybe not. Maybe not. I think so. So, so when we practice in this way, everything becomes simple. Poverty is not just poverty. Weakness is a weakness. Everything comes to have inherent value. And what do you get by practicing the sila? What do you get by practicing the precepts? So some of you wear a rapi seal. I'm sure that everybody here practices with the precepts. You know, what do you get by living a harmless life? That's really what the precepts are about. It's a vow that I will live as harmlessly as possible. So Michael Pollan has a new book out that he's talking about consciousness. And he says, he's talking about this Italian researcher. Some of you saw the movie. Is it called doing Fabulous Fungi or something like this fantastic fungi? And this Italian researcher that did an experiment that, I don't know how these things work, but it sure seems like plants are sentient, like they learn, like they have consciousness. The way it is, I don't want to tell the researchers, I'll get it all messed up. But he's talking about this, and he says, well, if even plants have consciousness, what can you eat? There's no clear path in any of this, And then he says, well, that's true, but there's some plants that want to be eaten, like apples. They want to be eaten so that their seeds get distributed and their life gets, I don't know. I really don't know. How do you live a life of no harm? Abandoning the taking of life unnecessarily. And for me, it's not, you're not more holy, not even, Robert, I felt Kapler's written a book on, I choose to be vegetarian, other people choose to eat meat. I remember my oldest daughter when I first became vegetarian, and I thought I was being very wise. It was coming up to Thanksgiving, and this was going to be the first Thanksgiving that they never had a turkey. And I was trying to explain this and, the reasons that, it was trying to live harmlessly as possible. And I said, how would you feel if, you don't just get turkey at the Save On Foods. It's a bird. You have to kill it. You have to kill it. You have to cut off its head. You have to rip its feathers out. You got to rip its guts out. And I said, how would you feel if you had to kill that turkey so you have it for Thanksgiving? She just get me together. I think we'll stop there.